This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell & Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com.
We have a chance now to make better choices in this budget, and I look forward to partnering with all of you to make that happen.
Thank you, Mr. Controller, but I don't know what school you went to, but that was 2 sentences. There was more like 2 paragraphs. And lots of commas.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out, and he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and politics in New York State government. And in this episode, we're exploring how the lobbying efforts of property owners and managers has entered a new phase thanks to the social media presence of former Bronx Assembly member Kenny Burgos, who is now the CEO of the New York Apartment Association and has become the front man for short, engaging content that is possibly changing how lawmakers and the public perceive some of the housing issues in New York City and around the state. And lucky for us, Kenny Burgos was in town for caucus weekend, so we got to chat with him about his social media presence. Thanks so much for making the time, Assembly member. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Dave. It was a great intro.
Well, it's all true, and it's caught my attention in part because I was talking with someone who, and this could just be an anecdotal example, but they said that your videos are resonating with some of the lawmakers here in Albany and possibly even changing some hearts and minds here in Albany. Have you gotten any feedback like that?
Thank you for that, and whoever told you that, thank you to them as well. Yeah, honestly, we certainly have, and I certainly have personally, in many private conversations, I've just heard from friends and folks who work in this space, learning so much from our videos, and that's what I try to approach, right? I try to present simply in a mostly educational and objective format on what's happening in the rent-stabilized space, how we are experiencing policy in real time, and how we're seeing sort of the rents, how we're seeing housing quality violations, and so it's not an easy thing always to make housing policy as interesting as possible on social media, but that's our main goal here. But I feel like it's made some difference.
Well, it's not just interesting, it's also accessible, because I hear a lot about these issues. I mean, you're talking about some of the things that date back to the 2019 rent package, and I've heard them discussed in many ways, and I often feel like people are just sort of talking at me, and maybe this is my lack of comprehension, but you frame all of this stuff in a way that is accessible. So how do you do that?
Like any industry, especially in housing, I think we all have our inherent language and lingo that most people on the outside wouldn't understand. So first and foremost, I try and simplify the language so that the average viewer just understands what it is we're talking about. I mean, everyone knows housing. Everyone has to either pay rent or a mortgage to live somewhere. But usually knowledge of housing policy doesn't go much further than that. So I try and take what I've learned. Many times it's the first time I hear it if I speak to my owners or managers or even tenants. And if I find it interesting, if I find it to be new information, then it's probably new information for the viewers. And so I try to dilute that into the simplest format as possible.
Well, you mentioned the viewers. Who is your audience? Because obviously, as we mentioned, lawmakers are seeing this in part probably because you share this stuff on your personal account as well. But is it just about policymakers, or are you trying to change hearts and minds more broadly?
No, it's New Yorkers overall. I mean, certainly lawmakers, I think, are interested and want to learn more. I don't think for a long time, even when I was a lawmaker, there was really any real estate organization taking the time to explain what's happening in this space, and specifically the rent-stabilized space. I think the real estate industry has sort of shifted back into the shadows just because of what's happened in politics over the past 10 years. But beyond that, I mean, even journalists like yourself, right? Respectfully, I've spoken to many journalists that just admittedly, they can't know everything. Journalists, their job is to sort of know a little bit about all.
A mile wide and an inch deep.
That's it, right? So I spent a lot of time speaking with journalists and just explaining again, what our owners are experiencing, why the policy, was intended one way, but is actually being received and experienced in another way. And then beyond that, just everyday New Yorkers. I mean, you see every single poll that comes out, and the number one concern that New Yorkers have is either housing or inflation and affordability. And to me, all that is related to one thing, and that is housing. To me, every issue in New York State at this point runs downstream of housing. So New Yorkers have a deep concern for this, and they come to me. I mean, believe it or not, here and there, I'll get recognized even in the streets. Say, hey, you're the guy that talks about housing online, right? And they always tell me, I had no idea about this or that. I learned so much from your videos. It's really good content. So it really comes down to trying to just educate overall New Yorkers, journalists, policymakers, their staff, and then really anyone who's interested in housing.
So what goes into making your videos? Because we have our own social media, and I can make content that is somewhat engaging, but it's my Gen Z producer who actually takes that stuff and makes it into thing that people want to click on and want to comment. So you are, I think, early 30s. Does that mean you're in that generation that can handle all this from A to Z, or do you have your own Gen Z or somewhere helping you with this?
I'm certainly a younger millennial, and I like to believe that I'm still pretty good in social media. I haven't reached the boomer age just yet, and even when I was a lawmaker, I had a pretty intimate role in my social media. But to answer your question, those 90-second videos certainly don't take 90 seconds to create, and I'm sure you know that.
Sure.
It's a lot of work. We're at the point where I'm producing at least 3 to 4 videos a week, trying to keep consistency and just constantly put information out. So what that looks like, is my staff takes a stab at a few scripts. We'll then have a script review where I'm pulling apart the details, making sure the words are clear, clarity, concise language that I would use and I think people want to hear. That's a few hours in itself. Then we run it through a couple of other folks for just like our legal team to make sure it's making sure that it's intellectually honest, making sure we have data to back it up. But beyond that, too, there's obviously the time in recording it. Then it's post-edits. I would probably say from soup to nuts, every video is easily 5 hours of labor or more.
Well, is that something you anticipated when you took this job, that you were going to be not just running the organization, but the social media star? Has it changed what your daily life is like?
It was part of my pitch.
Okay.
When coming into this role. It's about you have to meet people where they are. And in today's world, we all know that most people get their news from social media. Most people get their information online. Policy in New York is literally crafted sometimes out of conversations that are happening on Twitter and X.
That's scary and depressing.
It depends how you look at it, right? But knowing that, you have to meet people where they are. The traditional and modern way, the traditional and older ways of simply putting information out in an op-ed, trying to speak with folks in meetings and emails. That's still effective, but people's attention is so precious and so finite, and their attention most of the time is on their phones. And so that's why it's so important, I believe, for me to be out there and putting that information out on every single platform we can. We are on X, we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on YouTube.
Well, you mentioned that this was part of the pitch you had for yourself as the candidate to fill this role, and so clearly there was some sort of buy-in from the decision makers you answer to. But do any of those property owners or managers now say to you, hey, what are you doing with all these videos? Or do they get it as well?
Listen, in my organization, we have several thousand owners,
Sure.
so I can give you several thousand answers. We have certainly owners who are a bit of an older age and maybe don't appreciate the impact social media has today. Mm-hmm. Our work is not limited to social media. We still, as I said, do traditional work. We put out op-eds. We speak to traditional print media.
But this has to soften the ground, I imagine. I have to imagine when you send something like an op-ed or you do a face-to-face meeting, if they've already seen that quick social media clip, I think it must make a more receptive audience.
100%, and that's the idea behind it. It's about letting people sort of download the information on their own time in their own space with the ability to replay the video, stick to what interests them, and then there's a lot more follow-up that comes into that. But go back to your first question, there are many members on my organization that have seen our videos as well, and we share it with them, and they appreciate that there's someone out there speaking to and sort of at least offering a different perspective as to what's happening today in New York City and New York State as it pertains to housing and housing affordability. Because, listen, my goal here, as I always state, is the same as many lawmakers. My goals have never changed from moving to lawmaker to running this organization. I have a deep concern for affordability. I have a deep concern for the housing crisis that we're living in right now. I have a deep concern for my former constituents in the Bronx that I believe are on ground zero of what's happening right now in this housing crisis. I may have different approach and beliefs in how we fix that. But I think for too long, there really hasn't been a voice offering these options.
Well, one of the issues that you've highlighted with your videos and has been something that organizations like yours have talked about a lot is the 2019 rules dealing with basically how much you can recoup from investments you make into your property. And then we've got properties in New York City in particular that are left vacant as a result because they don't see a pathway to getting that money back. And you clearly have made things that are resonating with people. Is it fair to say that this is a top priority for 2026, or am I just misreading what videos you're making?
It is my North Star. It is the singular piece that handicaps this housing, that impacts the 2 million tenants that live inside rent-stabilized housing and threatens the future of all of their apartments, of all these buildings. I cannot understate how impactful that law has been and what we're seeing today from examples like the Pinnacle portfolio, 5,000 apartments that went bankrupt, examples of banks going under, examples of 200,000 apartments right now that are functionally bankrupt. And this is reporting coming from the NYU Furman Center. And this is a path that we're already headed down, and it's only getting worse. And there have been no proposals from leaders to try and fix this. So that is absolutely our goal. I often tell folks, I often say this saying, we have to judge policy on results and not intention. There's a lot of policy that's pushed with good intention and it's not delivering what it's supposed to. And 2019 is one of them. But you can look at results today, right? Things like the 485X tax credit, well-intentioned to build supply, but there's a part of that policy that has a labor wage standard that comes in after 100 units that are, I know, limited amount, but it seems is not penciling out to build this housing. And what we're seeing is people that are building housing are coming in just under 100 units. No one is building an apartment building over 100 units. So again, you have to see what the policy is delivering. So if we look at 2019 rent laws, what we're seeing is there's a minimum 50,000 apartments sitting empty right now in the midst of a housing crisis. You have buildings that are going bankrupt. You have apartments that are underwater, and this is not stopping. So I just don't think that policy has delivered what it was supposed to.
Some challenges need someone who simply won't quit. Modern Advocacy brings tenacity, strategy, and unwavering follow-through to every client it serves. Learn more at modernadvocacyllc.com. So do you see or foresee any action on this vacancy issue in 2026? Is there any reason why you're hopeful? Because while there's been turnover in the legislature, I wouldn't say that the attitudes around something like this have changed demonstrably. But then again, I also imagine there are some lawmakers who are quietly supportive of your position and would be happy to vote for something like this if it came to the floor, but maybe wouldn't say anything publicly until then.
It's still early. It's February, right, in session, and we all know in Planet Albany, a week can be a year, 2 months can be a lifetime. So hard to tell, but the drumbeat continually picks up, right? For a while, I think it felt like just me sort of ringing the alarm here, but we've had a lot more people raising concern. I mean, again, I repeat, NYU Furman Center putting reports out. The Citizens Budget Commission has drawn concern around rent-stabilized housing. CPC has drawn deep concern around this. Nonprofit housing that operates in a regulated space and pays no property taxes is struggling right now to make this work. So many folks are ringing the alarm and saying this housing is in deep trouble. The New York City Housing Conference has come out and said this is not simply a cost problem, right? We have to reduce costs. We can address insurance reform, property tax reform, and the cost to operate that housing, but it is also a revenue problem. So unclear, how long this road will be. My hope is always sooner rather than later. But I can tell you I have owners that tell me even today that they have but a few months before they give their buildings back to the bank.
So none of those entities, though, have a vote in Albany. So who do you turn to as your ally here in Albany, or your allies? Where do you turn to for support?
Our team talks to, everyone that is interested in this topic. Obviously, we've had conversation with the governor's office.
Do you need the governor to be the spearhead on this? Do they need to take the lead in order to get something like this done, you think?
I think an issue this big requires all hands on deck. I think it requires the acknowledgement from all three branches, the Senate, the Assembly, and the governor, to recognize that this is a problem that's not going away. Admittedly, again, there's still a lot more work to be done from an education standpoint, even from an advocacy standpoint. I put in if you look at my X account,
and you call it X, you don't still just call it Twitter?
I don't know. I've been dancing between. I'm trying to,
I still call it Twitter.
Yeah, I'll call it Twitter, happily. So my Twitter profile, if you look at the photo on my header, it's a photo of Michael Burry from The Big Short, for those unfamiliar.
Sure.
And it simply says, I may have been early, but I'm not wrong. And what I'm referring to is that, unfortunately, I'm just confident that this crisis is headed on such a bad track. This only increases day over day, month over month, where we're going to see more bankruptcies, we're going to see more buildings failing, we're going to see more disrepair, more disinvestment. And so I think, lawmakers have to pay attention. There's just no way you can't.
So coming back to your social media campaign, this is not being done in a vacuum. The other big social media player in New York State is the new mayor of New York City, who I think probably finds himself on the opposite side of a lot of housing issues from yourself. So how, if at all, do you approach how he's going to engage with social media with your own messaging? And do you feel like you need to respond to things that he puts out, like the renters versus landlords framing he's been pushing lately?
Yeah, and no question that my reach is probably 1% of Mayor Mamdani's reach.
No. I'd say 10%.
Wow, that's very generous. But I don't think the reach, particularly matters. I don't know why. It doesn't particularly matter, but to answer your question, absolutely.
I looked at his account. 1% was probably a better thing. He's at 11 million followers on Instagram.
Global.
Oh, my God.
But, he was absolutely elected on the issue of affordability, and I think that is centered around housing. And as I said, this is the number one concern for New Yorkers. So there are many moments where I'm going to meet him, at whatever argument he's making, if it's intellectually dishonest, or if he's, not leaning on the facts, the data, and that's what I always lean on. Like I said, we have the same goal here. The goal is to improve housing, to build more housing, to reduce rents, to improve affordability. And people don't believe me when I say this, when I'm head of the landlord lobby, if you will, right? But that is the goal here. But I have to make sure that people understand that I am bringing this information not from the perspective of a politician or a policymaker or someone who's trying to run for higher office. I bring this from the perspective of what the data is saying from New York City agencies, from the Rent Guidelines Board, from the Department of Finance, from our own internal data between our owners, and just give them the facts. So, yeah, I'm going to meet him where he is every time in any issue that's related to rent-stabilized housing.
What's next? Is it a continuation of the videos you're doing? Do you have any big projects in mind, or something else maybe off of social media?
Yeah, we actually we went to Vienna last year, shot a small documentary.
Did you come away with different conclusions about Vienna than the Democratic Socialists when they went to Vienna?
I'd say so. It'd take a lot longer for us to discuss here, but the idea was to go with an open mind, right? To understand that that's the model that they have, which is social housing that was created in Vienna. But I'll simply say that we left with the conclusion that it's just apples and oranges, right? One thing that I learned is that in Vienna, the government funds housing. In New York, housing funds the government. And what I mean by that is, in New York, right, New York City specifically, nearly 40% of the city's tax revenue is funded through property taxes. The same buildings that Mayor Mamdani and other elected officials vilify these owners when they're quite literally the foundation of New York City's operation. Whereas in Vienna, they impose this small percentage tax on every resident to help produce that social housing. And there's a whole host of history that we have to understand that helped Vienna achieve the housing they have today. When you go back to Red Vienna, the government controlled just so much land here that's obviously not possible today. The government doesn't control much public land today that you can build on or want to build on. I won't go too deep into it, but to your question, we're filming short documentaries. I'm expanding into YouTube, which is the king of online content, and want to expand on sort of longer form content because this topic is complicated. There's a lot of information. It's not always easy to dilute it to a 60 or 90-second video. It's good for quick hits and shares. But if I have people who have a deep interest in this, then I want to provide that content and really spell it out for them in 10 to 15-minute videos. So we're working on that as well. I have a podcast as well that we film. We do that about every 2 weeks. I'm really trying to approach every media angle that we can because this information just doesn't exist online, and I just simply can't rely only on journalists to include a quote or an excerpt of information we give them. Content and media has become incredibly expansive in the new world that we're in today, and I'm trying to make sure we're filling up every open space.
So clearly you have an interest in influencing the session or budget process here in Planet Albany. What about the election calendar? We have all the state legislators up for re-election or election in the fall. The governor's up for election. Are you planning on wading into politics in a meaningful way this year?
Well, we did last year in the mayoral race. I intend to this year as well. And
what does that look like? And do you see like a social media role for that? Do you see making videos with or against people? I mean, how can you capitalize on this momentum that you've been building on these different platforms?
Maybe not social media, maybe more traditional sense of just, fundraising and supporting candidates, who are, pragmatic and rational and really just approaching policy from a very balanced approach and just people we consider allies. Social media, as far as how we use that in politics, I haven't given that much consideration.
Well, I think the experience with the Mamdani campaign was one of those first actual elections where people converted social media followers into actual on-the-ground action and voting. So I guess it is not necessarily a given that people can convert social media views into actual action. It might not even be worth it.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. I mean, I tried to do this when I was a lawmaker. I mean, I was making these videos right when I was an assemblyman, and I found them effective, certainly for some call to action and awareness and spreading information. But translating that into, either actual voter turnout, recruitment of volunteers is just incredibly difficult. I think, speaking to Mayor Mamdani's campaign, I mean, there was a really solid infrastructure that was already built out before he even launched his campaign, by the Democratic Socialists of America, by WFP and all these folks. And that took years of work. So not to say it can't be done, but I don't think it can happen solely on social media.
So now that you've got this larger platform than you had, say, a couple of years ago, at what point are you going to begin inserting more bodybuilder content, more healthy, living content, as you start a broader brand for Kenny Burgos Incorporated?
I have no goals of becoming a quote-unquote influencer. And so my content will continue to stay limited to the housing landscape. Maybe I could do a couple of fun, sort of interesting spin-offs, but it's all going to come back to center around housing.
So there's not going to be something where you're doing chin-ups while also talking about something with regards to rent stabilization?
I'm not sure that actually moves the needle in policy or even this conversation at all.
I think there are some accounts that would definitely resonate
views,
with that.
But yeah.
Okay. Well, we've been speaking with Kenny Burgos. He's a former Democratic Assembly member from the Bronx, who's now the CEO of the New York Apartment Association, and you can find him on Twitter at Kenny Burgos NY or on Instagram at, wait for it, Kenny Burgos NY. Thank you so much, Assembly member. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Dave.
Mr. May, I've waited for this day. Congratulations on your 10 minutes. I'm still at 3. I need to start by asking the hard question, and a number of Black and Latino moms are very disappointed in the example you're setting for our youth. You have been seen on multiple occasions not wearing a hat. You have to lead by example for the youth. Will you commit to wearing a hat if the temperature drops below 40 degrees?
I'll commit to a hat and below freezing.
Thank you.